One city's named after a queen. The other one is not. It's week 4. It's Panthers Bengals. It's a Locked On NFL crossover Thursday here on Locked On Panthers and Locked On Bengals.
You are Locked On NFL crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers and Locked On Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you can listen to all the Panthers and Bengals coverage every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow our shows for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Today is Crossover Thursday, presented by our friends over at PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. I'm Julian Council, the host of Locked On Panthers, joined by Jake Lisco, one of the hosts of Locked On Bengals. The 1-2 Panthers facing off against the shockingly 0-3 Cincinnati Bengals at 1 o'clock here in Bank of America Stadium in Uptown Charlotte. Jake, how you doing, man?
Oh, great. As great as an 0-3 team could be on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, whenever the folks are listening to this episode. We're bad. We're down bad. The defensive line is bad. We're going to talk about these things. Personally, I'm doing okay. The Bengals not doing okay.
Yeah, I have a coworker here in Charlotte who's a Bengals fan, and I talked to him on Tuesday morning asking after that loss against Washington on Monday night, how you doing? He's like, nope, I'm done. He honestly said he was done with the team, Jake, after the week 1 loss against New England. So maybe he just wasn't into it at all this season. I have another friend from Ohio who's a big Bengals fan. He's refusing to talk to me this week, which is fine. I'm sure if the result goes his way, I'm going to hear from him around 4:10 Eastern time on Sunday. But looking at this team, like they're 0-3. I did not expect when looking at the schedule that the Bengals would be an 0-3 football team when they came to Charlotte. I was expecting to see a team that looked like an AFC title contender, and they may very well be at the end of the day. So what's the biggest story and what's led to this 0-3 start for the Bengals, just looking at the offensive side of the ball to start off?
Yeah, on the offensive side of the ball, you could say that things look fine, and they looked as they should against what I thought was the worst defense in the league until the Bengals defense challenged that assumption on Monday Night Football. The Commanders don't have a good defense either. And so the Bengals did what they should have done against that defense. They scored or had a field goal attempt miss on every drive, the missed field goal attempt and missed 2-point conversion where there was a clear DPI penalty, as Bengals fans are aware. Could have made a difference, maybe, but it's hard to make an argument that you had any business being in that game when your defense literally couldn't get a single stop. Literally, a single stop. You got a field goal once.
It was the first time since 1940 there was not a punt or a turnover in an NFL game, right? Is that what I saw?
I believe so. It's also a number of firsts, and I think Locked On Bengals listeners have heard this, but teams had never lost when scoring 3 touchdowns and not turning the ball over, not punting or something like that. Teams had never lost when going for the amount of yards the Bengals went for, not turning the ball over. Teams, the Chiefs became the first team to win in that situation of yards and points and turnover differential and third down percentage. So the Bengals have been on the wrong side of some like 101 or 201 now statistics in the last 2 weeks. So you can very easily make an argument that says this team shouldn't probably be 0-3. Right. You can make an argument that says they were a play away from winning in week 1. They were a DPI away from winning in week 2. They were literally one stop. That's all they needed for potentially winning in week 3. But even if they've played better than their record in some facets of the game, even if they have these arguments to make, they're 0-3. And in the NFL, you are what your record is. And so it is time to panic in Cincinnati. The margin for error does not exist the rest of the way. And suddenly the Panthers look competent with a quarterback who doesn't have to jump every time he throws the ball.
Yeah, suddenly, all of a sudden, one of the famous sons, if he still is in Cincinnati, Andy Dalton is the quarterback here in Carolina. We'll, of course, get over to that in a moment when we talk about the Panthers side of things. And, yeah, man, like it's interesting to me because I was looking at this team, Cincinnati, and just under Zach Taylor, 5 out of 6 years, they've started off 0-2. This is the second time they have started off 0-3. Like, what gives? Like, why can the Bengals, outside of, I guess, 2021, when you went, what was it, 21 or 22? I think the year went to the Super Bowl was the only time you got off the ground in September. Like, why can't they ever start off without having all these issues?
It's different things every year. In years past, it's been, Joe Burrow hasn't had a training camp. He had an appendectomy and he missed training camp. He was coming off the ACL, had a limited training camp. He had the calf last year and he couldn't move for the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season. And so in the past, we've mostly chalked it up to Joe Burrow has had some sort of ailment in the summer or the early part of the season. And as a result, the offense and Joe Burrow haven't looked good to start the season. And Joe Burrow didn't look good in week 1. Looked a little bit better in week 2. He looked really good on Monday Night Football this week. He looks like himself, contrary to what some on the social media apps would have you believe. And some people, for some reason, have chosen this week to nitpick Joe Burrow's game when the team just scored 33 points.
Oh, my God. I saw that. Yeah, on ESPN. Like, what are we doing here? Yeah, I mean, it's 2. It's not. It wasn't just Shannon. It was also whoever is on the morning show. I can't remember.
Yeah.
You probably. Yeah, that was insane to me when I saw that.
We don't like to acknowledge those as serious individuals, so we don't need to. But in years past, it's always been Joe Burrow can't start fast, and this year it's Joe Burrow was there for all of training camp and didn't miss time and is a full participant in all the practices. And if there are lingering effects from the wrist, they're not meaningfully, in my opinion, impacting his play at this point. In week 1, he was sped up and his eyes dropped. He became a runner in the pocket. The way that we were used to seeing Andy Dalton kind of crumble in the face of pressure when he was in Cincinnati back in the day at this point, because it's been a while. But that is not something that we got used to with Joe Burrow. And it's always taken him a little bit of time to kind of get comfortable with the speed of the game and get those reps under his belt. But we've always kind of chalked that up to he's not had training camp in the past. This year, there's a little bit of that in week 1. And then the inevitability or the DPI or whatever you want to say, make one more play, hold on to the ball, Joe, whatever you want to point to in week 2. And then all of a sudden, this thing that we've been fearing all year that they didn't do enough to backfill for the loss of Jesse Bates and DJ Reader and even Chidobe Awuzie, who they lost to an ACL before they lost him from the team. And suddenly the defensive front has no talent. And in their defense, BJ Hill, Sheldon Rankins couldn't play last week. They've got hamstring injuries. A couple years ago, last year's first round pick, Miles Murphy on injured reserve right now. This year's second, third round pick, McKinley Jackson, also on injured reserve. So they got 4 defensive linemen that are unavailable last week. But the defensive line did not look like NFL caliber players. And as I said somewhere last week, I don't remember where exactly it was, if you can take Trey Hendrickson away, the Bengals have literally nothing on the defensive line right now until somebody steps up and shows that they can do something as a pass rusher. If you're watching Monday Night Football, Jaden Daniels is throwing from, as it's been described, college pockets, or as Troy Aikman called it, he's essentially playing 7-on-7. And I don't care who you are. If you're able to play 7-on-7 on Sundays in the NFL, you're going to dice up a defense.
Yeah. And dice up he did. I was watching that game. It was impressive. But, man, that was certainly depressing to see. And now you talk about the injuries and maybe even kind of the void of talent in certain spots on that defensive front for the Bengals and in the back end. Are they able to right the ship, you think? Or is this just going to be what this defense is going to be in 2024?
Well, I don't think any secondary is holding up when a quarterback can sit in the pocket for 3 seconds. And it's a big pocket. And he's not throwing because he has to. He's throwing because he's hitting a third window on a slant. I mean, I've never seen, I don't think, maybe it's technically a second window, but Christian McCaffrey, or not Christian, his brother, Luke McCaffrey, takes a slant. I think it felt like a third window. You know how there's like a first window on a slant, and then you clear the first linebacker, you get a second window. It was on the other side of, the other side of the numbers. It's like video game stuff, right? Where you wait for the slant to get all the way to the other sideline. You know what I'm talking about? That's what it was. So I think that the back 7 is okay. Like, I feel fine about those guys for the most part. They maybe need a little bit more speed at safety. They maybe need a little bit more physicality overall. But for me, the root of the issue right now is the defensive front. Just not having enough depth, not having enough talent across the board, and injuries also depleting that further.
Well, that's not ideal for the Bengals as they're 0-3, but they are coming to Charlotte, where I'm expecting, considering all the Ohioans who live here in the area, there will be I'm not going to say a partisan Bengals crowd, but there's going to be plenty of Bengals fans in there and possibly making it a neutral site, which is unfortunate, but that's because David Tepper has done a terrible job with this organization, and a lot of people are checked out. But after what they saw from what Panther fans keep calling the Red Rocket, it's the Red Rifle, people. So stop saying the Red Rocket. What they saw from the Red Rifle, Andy Dalton, your boy on Sunday, has people excited about what this team potentially could do after just one win at Las Vegas. We'll talk about the Panthers side of things here in this week 4 matchup. I'm Julian Council, host of Locked On Panthers. He's Jake Lisco, host of Locked On Bengals. It's a Locked On NFL crossover Thursday, and we'll be back right here in just a moment. Football season is back, and the best way to get to games this fall is with Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Game Time Picks curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy so you know exactly what your view will be when you go to the game. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app and create an account and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Back here on Locked On Panthers and Locked On Bengals is the NFL crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network, presented by our friends over at Prize Picks. I'm Julian Council, the host of Locked On Panthers. He's Jake Lisco, one of the 2 hosts of Locked On Bengals. James Rapine is busy doing journalistic work at Bengals practice as we're recording this, but that's not important. You'll talk to him on Friday as you guys talk more about this on Locked On Bengals. The matchup here, week 4, between the 0-3 Bengals and the 1-2 Carolina Panthers. And as shocking as the Bengals are 0-3, after the first 2 weeks of the season here, Jake, it's shocking that the Carolina Panthers sitting here at 1-2, and that Andy Dalton became the first quarterback in the NFL this season to throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in a game. How is the feeling there in Cincinnati? Because we were talking about this via X DMs or Twitter DMs, whatever you want to call it, about Andy Dalton always finding a way to play the Bengals. What are the feelings about Andy Dalton all these years after he spent that, 9 years in Cincinnati?
Well, there's no ill will for Andy. I think that it was just the end of his time in Cincinnati. He had a great run. It was very unfortunate that his best year was cut short by a thumb injury in 2015 when he was legitimately putting up MVP level numbers in the Hugh Jackson offense. And that team looked like the best version of the Andy Dalton years. And like they have had issues with Carson Palmer and Andy Dalton, they seem to be having issues right now with the beginning of Joe Burrow's second contract kicking in. And the Bengals haven't figured out how to build teams around second contract quarterbacks. But no ill will toward Andy. I think, obviously would like to see them beat him. They're 1-2, I believe, against Andy Dalton, as he's been the quarterback for other teams in various circumstances and various capacities. But this will be the 4th team that the Bengals have seen Andy Dalton play for against them. And let's see, all of them are in the NFC, which is crazy. Dallas, Chicago, New Orleans.
Yeah.
Yeah. So despite him going to the NFC, the Bengals have managed to play him 4 times in 5 years on other teams. But did he transform things for that Carolina offense? Is that really the big story, that, you've got a veteran that knows how to run an NFL offense and suddenly things are not as bad as they seem in Carolina?
Yeah, it transformed the offense from being non-functional to functional. And I asked my listeners prior to the season beginning what their expectations were for this Panthers team, and all they asked me was they wanted competence. And the Panthers overall, offensively, defensively, special teams, aside from Eddie Pinheiro making field goals, also known as Eddie Pinheiro, the offense Pinheiro, they needed to go out there and do something and try to figure things out offensively. And their best bet was, I guess, to bench Bryce Young. I didn't love the idea of the move, considering the Panthers did so much to help him to get things to actually be good around him. But he was terrible week 1 and week 2. And I understood that eventually they were going to have to bench Bryce Young if he played like that for the sake of Bryce, but for the sake of the locker room. And when I watched these guys on Sunday, the energy that they displayed is something I've not really seen since the Panthers brought back Cam Newton a couple years ago in that game against Arizona on the road. Like, it feels like those guys on this team believe in Andy Dalton way more than they ever believed in Bryce Young heading into the season. It was palpable. The defense had been god-awful. Now, they were terrible against the run. The Raiders are the worst run offense in the league. That probably played a big role in it. But either way, they're getting off the field. It was a blowout. The game was over late third quarter. It was 33-7, and Andy was outstanding. Got the ball out on time, was protected, trusted the pocket, was accurate. All the things that they were hoping to see from Bryce Young the first 2 weeks, Andy Dalton provided as a veteran. And Deontay Johnson, the receiver the Panthers traded for in the offseason from Pittsburgh, he came in and said after the game on Sunday what was different about Andy coming in. He said the veteran presence, that the team needed someone like that they really played hard for Andy. He said, not to say we didn't play hard for Bryce. I watched the game. I don't know if you saw it, but anyone who checked it out understood that things were a lot different for the Panthers, energy-wise, focus-wise, of Andy Dalton in there than there was with Bryce Young the 2 weeks prior. So he's certainly changed that dynamic as they now have a functional offense. They were able to throw the ball down the field, and that is able to complement what they have in what could be a dynamic run game. As Chuba Hubbard was outstanding last week, running for over 100 yards. First time in like 13 games, the Panthers had a 100-yard rusher and receiver. So, yeah, Andy's changed things for the team offensively, but I'm really focus on this week the wide receiver play aside from Deontay Johnson, as you have Adam Thielen on IR for the next 4 weeks in Carolina. We'll see how long he's going to be out after those 4 games. He could come back week 8 against the Denver Broncos on the road. But it's really, to me, Deontay Johnson and Adam Thielen. Xavier Legette, who they drafted in the first round, there's obviously a lot of fans who want to see what he can do. I just cautioned him. He missed a lot of time in the preseason and even going back to OTAs to where it may take him some time. But now he's going to be an Adam Thielen spot right there in the slot. He's going to get an opportunity. So can he get open? Can Jonathan Mingo get open, the second-year wide receiver from Ole Miss? And can they make plays and be able to make this be more than just one guy at the wide receiver spot like we saw last year when it was only Adam Thielen and a bunch of guys who couldn't do anything at all?
From my side, and we'll talk about this perhaps in the keys coming up in a bit.
Yeah.
If the Panthers are able to run the ball again, and there's no reason to believe that the Bengals can stop any running game right now, unless they get some guys healthy, which as of today, BJ Hill still listed as an estimated DNP on the Bengals estimated practice report because they just did a walkthrough Wednesday after playing Monday Night Football. Sheldon Rankin is also a DNP. Those guys, we'll see. Maybe BJ Hill gets back. Zach Taylor sounded a little bit more optimistic that BJ Hill could return on the defensive interior, but you're hoping that Chris Jenkins can play a little bit more for you this week, that Lawrence Guy, the guy they had to sign off the street, is wearing 74 playing defensive tackle, can do something in there. But, I mean, if Chuba Hubbard's able to go off again, everything gets easier for Andy Dalton. Everything gets easier from a play calling perspective, from a game script perspective, from a doing what you want to do on offense perspective. And that would give you the opportunity for some of these non-Adam Thielen, non-Deontay Johnson receivers to get comfortable as well. That's what's scaring me. Do you see that playing out? Is that something that you think is going to be the way the Panthers attack this game? Are they going to start run game first on offense?
I would hope so. I know throughout the offseason, Dave Canales, the head coach and play caller here, talked about being stubborn around running the football. And in the first 2 weeks of the season, and I understand they got down 30-0 against New Orleans. You're probably not going to try to run the ball that much when you're down by that amount. The Chargers game, they were down the entire time, but it wasn't like they were getting blown out. He wasn't dedicated to running the ball. And Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders combined had 28 carries in the first 2 weeks. On Sunday, 21 for Chuba, 7 for Miles, and they were able to do exactly what they wanted to do, in large part because they were able to throw the football and actually be effective in the pass game. So I do expect that they're going to want to ground and pound. They're going to look at the deficiencies there right now, do the health-wise for the Bengals defensive line and try to attack that. Now, the Panthers do have questions on their offensive line with Damian Lewis, their left guard who they signed in free agency out of Seattle. He's dealing with an elbow injury. Apparently has like a UCL tear. The good thing is he's not a pitcher in baseball because he'd be done for the rest of the year. But he will possibly be able to play. If he's not, Chandler Zavala, the 4th round pick out of NC State from a year ago who really struggled his rookie year, he's stepping in there. And he's someone who they feel like has grown a lot. I'm still concerned based off of what I saw last year, but we'll see what he's able to do. I feel like this offensive line that really dealt with a lot of injuries last season is in a better spot this year to be able to avoid, at least take on injuries and have guys who can step up who have played in the past, like Brady Christensen, who started left guard a couple of years ago, having Zavala stepping in there as well. So, yeah, I expect them to want to run the ball and be able to open up things offensively that way in the pass game by feeding off of the run, getting some play action in there as well. But looking at defense too, man, like just looking at where this team's at, I'm very curious to see how they're going to match up against T. Higgins and against Jamar Chase. This is going to be really the first test for the secondary where they had one bust week 1 against the Saints, and the Saints offense came out just blazing hot against both the Panthers and Cowboys, who probably don't have the best defenses in the NFL. And the Panthers really struggled against the run the first 2 weeks. Last week against the worst run offense in the NFL, and the Raiders, they were able to hold them to 55 yards. And that's exactly what you would like to see. Cincinnati, though, this has been really interesting to me because I saw that they're second in EPA when it comes to run offense, but they've only attempted to run the ball 30. They're 31st in the league when it comes to attempts, and in 28 in yards. So like they can run the ball. It feels like they just don't run the ball. So the Panthers, if they come out and can't stop the run, like that's going to be really my chief concern. Aside from can the non-JC Horn corners, that being Mike Jackson, hold up against T. Higgins or Jamar Chase or even Yosiva? Is that his last name? How to pronounce it? The guy at Princeton who's looking pretty good so far for y'all.
Andre Yosevich, much more of a red zone threat than a between the 20s threat, but very interested to see that Panthers run D as well. The Bengals took advantage of a porous run defense last week. They couldn't keep running the ball because they couldn't stop the Commanders, but they ran it 20 times for 6.2 a carry, and they found some things. They were very diverse in the run game, which is a lot of fun to watch as well in terms of getting to a lot of interesting concepts from different and interesting alignments as they become more of a 12 personnel team. But that'll be a fun matchup in addition to those wide receivers against that Carolina secondary.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I'm looking at, always the trenches. And there's questions for both sides of the ball when it comes to that, especially on that defensive line. So we'll see how it plays out on Sunday. We'll come back and talk about what are the 3 things the Panthers and the Bengals respectively need to do to win this game on Sunday in Uptown Charlotte. I'm Julian Council, host of Locked On Panthers. He's Jake Lisco, one of the 2 hosts of Locked On Bengals. It's a Locked On NFL crossover Thursday here on our shows. We'll be back here in just a moment. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you'll place your favorite bets. And looking at this game on Sunday, the Bengals currently are 4.5-point favorites. The over-under is at 47.5. And if you want to bet on the touchdown score, -115 for Zach Moss, -110 for Jamar Chase, -105 for Chuba Hubbard, +160 for Deontay Johnson, and +180 for T. Higgins. So go ahead, place those bets over on FanDuel. And when you do, you'll get started with a $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on Locked On Panthers and Locked On Bengals, I'm Julian Council, host of Locked On Panthers. He's Jake Lisco, one of the 2 hosts of Locked On Bengals. It's a crossover Thursday here presented by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Panthers, Bengals, week 4. Panthers 1-2. Andy Dalton inserted at quarterback. And the Bengals surprisingly 0-3, but I still feel like this is a Bengals team with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. I know they got to get things done defensively, figure that out, get healthy. I'm not going to write them off. I mean, obviously, Pittsburgh, who's 3-0, is not going to lose more than 8 games as Mike Tomlin refuses to ever have a losing season. So, you know, you got to at least get to 9-10 to be able to catch up with them. And then the Ravens haven't looked the best so far. And Cleveland, yikes, that's a problem. So there's 2 teams you got to catch up to. But we're really thinking about it, Jake. Just thinking positive vibes for Bengal fans, as I do really enjoy watching Joe Burrow all the way back his time at LSU. I'm always going to be a fan of his. And hopefully entertainment sake, just for like football. Like someone's got to stop Mahomes and the Chiefs. And it's been the Bengals. Burrowhead Stadium, never forget. So looking at this game on Sunday. Yeah, please forget. Yes, I mean, a couple weeks ago it was tough. We're looking at this game on Sunday. Bengals, I last saw were, I think, what I say, a 4.5-point favorite in this game. Yep. What are the 3 things that they have to do in order to come out with their first win of the season on the road against where I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of Bengals fans here in Charlotte?
I'll say tongue in cheek, get a single 1. This many, if you're watching on YouTube's stops on defense. That would be a start. And like I said, that starts up front. So finding a way to get pressure, to confuse Andy Dalton. We have seen him in Cincinnati get confused in the past, drop his eyes, become a runner, break down the throwing mechanics in the pocket when what he wants isn't there. Find a way to get him uncomfortable. That starts up front. And most of these keys are on the defensive side of the ball to me. Stopping the run, forcing the Panthers into situations that are not 3rd and 1 or 3rd and short, and making it actually challenging for the Panthers to convert is what I'm looking for from this defense. The Washington Commanders were able to stay ahead of the chains the entire game. And that's probably number 2, which goes into getting some of those stops on 1st and 2nd down, stringing plays together, containing the run game, which I actually did a decent job of on 1st downs against the Commanders, perhaps to their detriment in pass defense though. Right. And so Andy Dalton not presenting the threat as a scrambler that Jaden Daniels is maybe makes their job a little bit easier this week. And last, it's continue what you have working on offense. Continue to protect well. The Panthers don't look like a team that should be able to heat you up too much as a passer. They don't have the best pass rush in the NFL. You should be able to take advantage of matchups throughout this secondary. You should be able to run the ball this week. So continue to look like the offense that you should be, and that should lead to another highly productive day for this offense. I would say something about the red zone and nitpick there. Finish off your drives in the red zone. That has been an issue for the Bengals this year. That could arguably be one of the reasons they're at 0-3 right now. But it's continue what you're doing on offense and find some kind of answer on defense. That's the basic gist of it. How do your 3 keys for the Panthers to win this game line up with what I'm talking about?
Yeah, and this is actually wasn't one of my keys, but that's a good point you bring up there about the Panthers pass rush. It is the worst in the NFL. It was the worst in the NFL last year, and I think it's going to be the worst all season long. And now there was some updates on Wednesday from Dave Canales about potentially getting some guys back who are currently on IR or on PUP or on the non-football injury list, and a couple of their pass rushers are, and they're hoping that potentially they can get Amari Barno, who tore his ACL week 16 last year, back soon. They're hoping that their free agent signing DJ Woonem, who they signed actually before Jadeveon Clowney, can come back in the near future. And they're going to need some of these guys who have been out on PUP and on the IR to come back and help them out in the pass rush. So that's going to be really the first test for the Panthers against a team that has a really high-level passing game to go up against. So that's something I'm certainly concerned about if Joe Burrow has plenty of time to sit back there in the pocket and deliver the ball. Because on Sunday against Gardner Minshew, they were able to be fine, as they were able to hold back in the back end, as really it's just Devontae Adams had to worry about. As far as the 3 things I'm looking at in this game, kind of goes back to what I alluded to earlier. You got to get somebody outside of Deontay Johnson to step up at wide receiver. Chuba Hubbard was outstanding in a run game last week. Expect him to have success again on the ground. Expect Deontay Johnson to be able to make some of his plays, but somebody has got to step up in the absence of Adam Thielen, not just on Sunday, but in the next 3 weeks moving forward. And Xavier Lee gets the guy that everyone here is going to be looking to see. Last week, got a nice running catch for 35 yards. He has the explosion that led him to be a first-round pick here in Carolina. It led him to have a breakout season last year at South Carolina. So everyone's trying to see what he can provide. Jonathan Mingo, great opportunity. Someone who really played well in the slot back in college at Ole Miss, who's really struggled playing the Z position here in the NFL. So we'll see what he's able to provide for them on Sunday. Second thing we're looking at, the run defense. I get it. The Bengals have not been dedicated to running the ball. They wanted to run the ball on Monday night, couldn't get a stop. If they're able to get ahead early with the passing offense, run the ball effectively as well, they can start leaning on the Panthers, where I do think that defensively they'll probably get more stops than they got last week. Like, the Panthers are not going to score on every possession. I'm pretty sure about that, Jake. Maybe they do, but I do not think that's going to be the case in this game on Sunday. So got to be able to stop the run. And number 3, they got to match the Bengals' desperation. History shows that teams that start off 0-2 do not make the playoffs. I feel like it's kind of a bogus stat, because at some point in time with the expanded playoff, more of these teams are going to make it. I know Cincinnati is one of those teams in recent memory. And what's really the difference between being 0-2 and then like all of a sudden being 2-2? Like, if you're 2-0, then you're 2, and like it's basically the same thing. So Cincinnati's obviously going to want to win this game. It's going to match their desperation and energy in this game on Sunday if they're going to be able to come out on top in this game against the Bengals. So we'll see how it plays out, Jake.
Yeah, I think that desperation only gets you so far. At some point, you also need to execute. They were pretty desperate last week as well, again, against a bad team, and they couldn't get it done. They were desperate against the Chiefs, and they got up for that game and couldn't get it done. So at some point you have to execute, obviously. But again, I think they're looking at this weekend. I know you said it's a 4.5-point spread. Now that's probably good news for the Bengals. They have been 7+ point favorites twice and lost straight up in both of those games in this young season. I think this game opened around 7.5, or was it 7.5 before week 3's action, has come down considerably. So the Vegas odds makers see this as a tighter game with the emergence of Andy Dalton and the disintegration of the Bengals defense on Monday Night Football. And we'll see how that plays out. But for both of these teams, the vibe I'm getting from this conversation is whoever controls the game early, can get that early stop, can get that early lead, will make things a lot harder on the other team. And with the Bengals defense being in the state it is, I find that I'm going to be saying that a lot this year, I think, where in previous years I would have felt fine with them going toe to toe and being in a back and forth game. At this point, if the Bengals can't make the Panthers one dimensional, then I worry about their ability to get a stop at any point throughout the game.
Yeah, should be a fun one on Sunday. Panthers, Bengals, Week 4, Bank of America Stadium, 1 o'clock Eastern time. That's going to wrap up this Locked On NFL Crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Panthers, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council, and Locked On Bengals, hosted by Jake Lisco and James Rapien. We'll both be back here on Friday, checking out more about the game, talking more about what's going to happen and what we think the Panthers and Bengals need to do in order to get the victory on Sunday. Again, subscribe and follow the shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And, of course, check out our friends over at PrizePicks who were able to sponsor this show. Again, for James Lisco, I'm Julian Council, and we will talk to y'all on Friday.